Listen to that sound. That is not just noise. That is the sound of your profit margin burning away. That is the soundtrack of the Nigerian economy. Blackout costs Nigerian businesses about $28 billion annually, according to World Bank. Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, over 200 million people, a nation chasing a $500 billion future, even flirting with the ambition of $1 trillion economy. But here's the problem. The lights won't stay on. And when the richest black man on earth panics, you don't just scroll past. You take note and investigate.
Without power, Mr. Vice President sir, there's no way in any country you can create growth or you can create jobs.
Aliko Dangote just hit the alarm button. He's calling for an emergency power summit. Why? Because the relentless blackouts are not just an annoyance anymore. They are an existential threat, a system failure so massive it threatens to wipe out Nigeria's $500 billion industrial ambition.
One of the things that I want to advise Your Excellency, Mr. Vice President, is to call a national forum where we'll have a day or 2 days retreat and resolve the issues of power.
This is O1 Hustle. If you care about African industrial power, subscribe. This channel breaks down the moves shaping the continent's future. At the launch of the National Industrial Policy 2025, politicians spoke confidently about economic expansion, manufacturing growth, and global competitiveness. On paper, it was ambitious, strategic, transformational, but in the room stood a man who has invested billions building actual factories, not policies. Aliko Dangote. And he didn't clap politely. He issued a warning, not a suggestion, not a recommendation, a warning. Dangote called for an emergency national retreat, a power summit, describing unreliable electricity as the single biggest threat to Nigeria's industrial future. Let's translate that. If Nigeria does not fix electricity, the $500 billion dream collapses. Why does this warning hit differently? Dangote is not a commentator. He built one of the world's largest oil refineries, Africa's largest cement empire, massive fertilizers and industrial plants. These facilities don't run on hope. They run on megawatts. If billion-dollar facilities struggle with power, what chances does a small enterprise in Lagos, Kano, or Aba have? Let's look at the numbers. In recent months, December 2025 through January 2026, Nigeria's national grid suffered repeated collapses. At one point, generation reportedly plugged from about 3,800 megawatt to roughly 39 megawatt per minute. That is not a national power system anymore. That is an AA battery expected to power an industry. The country's installed capacity exists on paper, but effective, reliable output is more like tales by moonlight. And reliability is where the system fractures. Let's escalate this investigation. The Nigerian presidency, the highest office in the land, is unplugging from the national grid. The same grid expected to power over 200 million citizens. The same grid meant to anchor a $500 billion industrial ambition. It is no longer trusted to power Aso Rock presidential villa. Instead, the villa is transitioning to a dedicated solar mini-grid, backed by a 10 billion naira allocation in the 2025 budget, with additional funding planned for 2026. This is not a backup inverter. It is a purpose-built, stand-alone power system to guarantee uninterrupted electricity at the command center of the country. Strategically, that's significant. Now pause. If the most protected and politically prioritized facility in Nigeria cannot rely on grid stability, what signal does that send to investors and foreign capital watching from London, Dubai, Beijing? The symbolism is impossible to ignore. Here's the deeper implication. When government ring-fences itself from volatility, the private sector follows. That means more self-generation, high operating cost, diverted capital, and weaker competitiveness. The grid was meant to be shared national infrastructure, but when even the presidency engineers its own power island, one truth becomes clear. Electricity in Nigeria is no longer infrastructure. It is risk, and risk demands hedging. Here is another uncomfortable truth. Nigeria generates less power than some cities in Europe with populations under 1 million. Let that sink in. And even with the little generation, the generation companies, Gencos, are reportedly owed over 4 trillion naira. Think about that. Imagine supplying electricity for years and not getting paid. Eventually, you slow down, you delay maintenance, you hesitate to invest in upgrades, liquidity dries up, capacity falls, confidence collapses. Electricity is infrastructure, but it's also a business. And a business starved of cash cannot deliver stability. Here's the irony. Nigeria sits on one of Africa's largest natural gas reserves. Yet, power plants regularly starve for gas. Recent maintenance disruptions in gas infrastructure triggered nationwide outages, exposing how fragile the supply chain is. Nigeria's power ecosystem is heavily gas dependent. One pipeline issue, one maintenance shock, one payment delay, and the entire grid flickers. This is not just technical vulnerability, it is structural fragility. Here's what no one is saying. Electricity instability is the largest silent tax in Nigeria. For every liter of diesel a factory burns, every electricity generated by a petrol generator, every inverter system installed by a startup, that is capital diverted from growth. Instead of expanding production, hiring staff, investing in research and development, or scaling exports, business invests in power generation. Nigeria runs millions of generators. Collectively, businesses spend billions of dollars annually on self-generation. That is money that could have built industries. Instead, it buys fuels. The National Industrial Policy 2025 aims to reduce import dependence, strengthen local value chain, scale manufacturing, boost exports. Strategically, it's a sound policy, but industrial policy without electricity is academic exercise. Every industry cannot operate in darkness. Manufacturers cannot compete globally if their energy cost is 5 times higher than competitors in Asia or Europe. Foreign direct investment does not flow into blackout zones. This is not ideology, it's arithmetics. Nigeria now stands at a crossroad. 1. A $500 billion industrial economy driven by refining, cement, agro-processing, petrochemicals, technology, and exports. 2. An economy trapped in high production cost, low competitiveness, capital flight, and chronic blackouts. The difference between two is power stability. Dangote's call is not for another committee, it's for system-level intervention. A credible emergency retreat would need to align generation companies, transmission authorities, distribution companies, gas suppliers, industrial stakeholders, and federal policymakers. The objective is to fix the liquidity crisis, secure gas supply, strengthen grid stability, implement structural reliability, not temporary patches. The industrial momentum is fragile. Lose it long enough and investment flows everywhere. Here is the bigger strategic message. Dangote's warning extends beyond power. He also emphasized protecting local industry from being undercut by imports, especially when domestic producers face higher energy costs. This is classic industrial strategy. Stabilize inputs, protect scaling industries, build competitive advantage, but again, everything begins with electricity. You cannot industrialize in the dark. You cannot even charge your laptop in the dark. So what does this mean for you? If the grid is unreliable, your operating cost rises, your margin shrinks, and your scalability slows. While policymakers debate structural reform, you must build resilience. You cannot control the national grid, but you can control your exposure to it. Nigeria has the capital, the population, the natural resources, and the industrial ambition. The question is, can Nigeria build a $500 billion economy? Because without power, the $500 billion dream isn't delayed, it's dead. And when Africa's largest industrial investors says the system is in need of an emergency, you pay attention. This is 01 Hustle. We don't just watch the headlines, we decode the game.